Really? And what's your master's in? Or
Uh,
how many masters do you have? You could have several.
I have one master's and a PhD. The master's is in ed psych, educational psychology, and
Okay.
the PhD is pretty much in ed psych too. It was called learning, cognition, and development, but my area of emphasis was reading.
Oh, nice.
So,
Very
but
nice.
you can't really go to a university and get a master's in reading without getting whole language. At least at
True.
that time, I think maybe it might be a little bit better now in a few places, but not many.
True. So we're live.
Great.
So good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Dyslexia Coffee Talk. I'm your host, Ashley, and we are here today with Dr. Dale Webster of, I always want to say Core Learn, but it's just Core, right?
CORE stands for Consortium on Reaching Excellence in Education. It's was called a long time ago Consortium on Reading Excellence.
Okay.
When we moved to math or added math onto our services, we couldn't continue calling it reading only. So we changed our name to Consortium on Reaching Excellence in Education. So it's a mouthful, so we say CORE. It is confusing because our URL is corelearn.com. And so people want to call it core learning or core learn.
Gotcha.
So
Which I, definitely made that mistake and went Core Learning. So.
I'm glad I caught that. And thanks for correcting that. It was great.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm glad you caught it too. Um, so tell us what core is. I think probably, most of the people in California know what it is. I'm sure people outside of California, but within the parent community, I don't know how many within the parent community, I don't know how many parents know about the individual groups that exist. You know what I mean? So tell us about core.
Absolutely. Core has been around since 1995 or 96. There's always kind of been a debate about when it actually started. So I like to say that time frame. Linda Diamond, who is the founder and just recently retired president of CORE, has been with the company since that time. And our California's former state superintendent, Bill Honig. So both Bill Honig and Linda Diamond founded the company back in 95, 96. And what CORE is really is a professional learning company that provides professional learning services in evidence-based practices for teaching, reading, and language, and math.
Wow.
Yeah, so we aren't a curriculum. We have some products, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we provide a professional learning service for school districts, and our big push is to really help schools and districts implement the reading or math curriculum that they have, and help them shore it up if there are gaps in the curriculum. And if necessary, we help them and try to steer them in the direction of getting a new program that might be better aligned to the science of what we know about learning and teaching reading and math.
Um, wow. So when you say math, that's, because we focus so much on reading, but so many of our kids struggle in math too.
And it's interesting because we started out with reading since 1996, and it was about 2010 that CORE switched over to math. So our math services still are not equal in terms of how much we deliver that as it is reading. Reading still gets primary attention in our
Mhm.
work, and we're working in ways to build up our math services and bring attention to math. So and our parent company, Pivot Learning, is really involved, has gotten some Gates Foundation grants that have really emphasized math. And so we're involved in several projects now related to math. So that's very exciting for us. And we're working to kind of think about our math services and our math framework and trying to build that out to add some more attention to that. Because as you said, math is also very important. I think in light of the COVID crisis that, kids have been in school for really the past year, or limited schooling, I should say. There's a lot of unfinished teaching and learning that needs to happen in both literacy and math.
Definitely. And I find with math too that it's not just the language of math, sometimes it's how you communicate it as well. So,
Yes, absolutely.
Um, so do districts contract with you, or do you provide professional develop? I mean, can like a teacher reach out to you and say, I'm looking for professional development? How does that work?
Yeah, so we use historically and still we provide mainly our services are to schools and to districts. We do have our online elementary reading academy now that individual teachers can register for, and we do have individuals that reach out to us, and we have about 3 or 4 times a year we have what we call kind of national or mixed um, cohorts where anyone can register, and we advertise that. So individuals can do that, or small groups, but we do a lot of work with school districts that want a group of their teachers, large numbers, or maybe just a cohort of 15 to 30 might join in on the um, online elementary reading academy. And we have actually probably I'd say about maybe 7 to 9 courses running right now
Oh,
simultaneously.
wow.
We have different, they're asynchronous courses. I mean, you can do it kind of on your own time,
Mhm.
um, but it's facilitated. So we have 7 different sessions that focus on the different components of reading and also reading assessment. And each one of those sessions lasts a week or two. And so you have that the participants have the flexibility to kind of work on their own time within that week or two that session is running. But then the consultant will send an email out saying, we're starting our new session. You should have finished up all the requirements for the previous session. We're going to move on to vocabulary now. And so there's a little bit of direction, if you will, and timeline. But within that timeline, you have flexibility, if that makes sense.
No, it does, totally. So I'm thinking of, how you're working with districts, those districts that are trying to make that switch from balanced literacy over to evidence-based practices based on science. How long do you typically engage with, I mean, because that's not a short transition, right? When we interviewed Dr. Moach, she said prepare for, up 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
How So I guess you're guiding the teachers through that whole, not just guiding the teachers, but I guess guiding the leadership of a district through that whole process and help them steer the ship, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, it's a very complex process, and we have different levels of that happening in various districts across the country. As I stated, I think, or you stated that we're a California-based company, but we have national recognition. We work all over the country and have since the late 90s, really moving outside of California. So have a lot of national recognition. Our teaching reading source book, which is kind of what many people refer to as the Bible of teaching reading. It's a big purple book. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it's has a lot of great information about the research, but also gives practical application. There's model lessons at the end of each chapter. We have several chapters on, letter recognition, irregular word reading, phonics, phonemic awareness, all the components of reading. And each chapter has specific model lessons that
Mhm.
follow an explicit teaching format, so that teachers really can use those as models for their curriculum, that whatever curriculum that they're using. And if they're feeling like there are things that are lacking, our consultants can go in and help support utilizing the tenets of what they've learned in our reading academy to applying that to their core reading program. And that's challenging depending on the core reading program that districts are using. Um, it varies in the level of which they can make that general transfer or application from what they have in their curriculum and what that's telling them to do, to kind of making that leap to more effective teaching and explicit instruction. So it's a big lift, and if the program's too far afield from what the evidence is saying, then we start helping them think about and looking closely at their data, and think about, maybe you should get a supplemental curriculum to help support, say, the phonics and phonemic awareness piece. Or maybe if many districts are, we're talking to districts now, and they're saying, we're looking at adopting a new curriculum now. We're actually exploring new programs now. So we can help them with that process as well. So it kind of varies on where they are in the continuum. But one district that we're working with in the Santa Cruz area was really um, in the balanced literacy realm and working with level text and predictable text and three queuing system. And they had a program that they really weren't using called SIPS.
Mm.
That's a program, a foundational skills program that's authored by John Scheffelbein, who recently passed away. He was a professor at Sacramento State. And it's published by the Collaborative Classroom. And we core partners with the Collaborative Classroom to provide professional development and support for SIPs in California.
Okay.
So we've been working with this district near Santa Cruz for a few years now, I'd say since 2016 or 2017, to help them implement SIPs. So what they're doing now is they've adopted Benchmark, which is one of the California adopted curricula, but recognize that there are weaknesses in that curricula as well in phonics and phonemic awareness. So they're just using SIPs in place of the foundational skills instruction that's in Benchmark. So we're really spending a lot of time helping them focus their attention on the implementation of SIPs, and they've done really well. The district has a large population of migrant students and high population of English learners, and they're really excelling, and their third grade reading scores are really, more and more kids are on grade level. Yeah, and so it's very exciting to see that growth and that in continual improvement every year. We did an actual third-party evaluation of our work there, and what they found was that the student data. So we were able to compare some schools who had core supporting the implementation of SIPs, and some schools who did not receive that support, but they received training.
Okay.
So to back up a little bit, what the research really shows is that providing just training to teachers without any coaching, follow-up coaching or job embedded support really does not help a lot with improvement and transfer of practice. Even if the training is really well done and there's opportunities within the training to practice new techniques, teachers need that ongoing support, and so do administrators, to help think about what to look for and how they can support teachers. And so this idea of job embedded support is really important. And that this district that we're working with has really bought into that and put a lot of resources towards that effort. And they've seen the fruits of their labor, so to speak, in that the student scores are really improving. And that's really exciting for us. And so to go back to what I was saying about the third party evaluation, they found that for the schools that got the support, the job embedded coaching from core, their students did statistically significantly better, as opposed to the schools who didn't get the support. So we were able to really kind of link our professional development services to student achievement. And that's a hard thing to do.
Mhm.
So we're
I'd
excited.
actually heard that at the IDA National Conference. There was a lecture specifically on, the teacher train, the implementation, the coaching, the teacher training versus the ongoing professional development. So yeah, I agree that's key to helping turn a district from the balanced literacy direction to the science of reading direction. But
Right.
of course, you would know far better than I would. So,
Well, it makes a lot of sense too. I mean, it's just investment in human capital, human resources, and their learning, and we've historically seen that when districts commit to a long-term professional learning for their teachers, and build in that internal capacity so that we as core aren't there for, decades, that you want to build that internal capacity and have literacy and math coaches building their knowledge and providing support to them so that they can take over the reins, so to speak, and continue providing that support alongside with administrators as well. It takes really teachers, coaches, administrators all working together to improve instruction for kids and improve performance for kids.
By the way, we've had a comment from a teacher saying your reading Bible is awesome with multiple exclamation marks
Oh,
after it.
great. Yeah, thank you for that. We get a lot of that feedback across the country.
And one parent has asked if y'all are doing any work in Indiana. Is that a state that y'all have gone into?
We actually haven't done a ton of work in Indiana, unfortunately, but we recently, I would say about a year ago, I'd have to go back and check our records, but worked with South Bend implementing SIPs. And we did some initial training and a little bit of follow-up support, but it hasn't gone to a long-term project. So, and that happens a lot with districts. It just, especially with COVID, we've gotten interrupted in a lot of our services where districts really had to kind of turn their attention away from, the plans that they had for professional development and then think about, like, how do we address this COVID issue, which has been a huge challenge for everybody. And it's nice to see that we're starting to kind of come out of that and kids are starting to come back into school in person. And that's a whole new shift for everybody as well.
True. So at least a question has come in, and at least us at the Dyslexia Initiative, we don't recommend or, put our backing behind any one curriculum because we're parent advocates.
Right.
We're not scientists. But a question did come in asking, is SIPS a program that CORE recommends? Or, obviously you're working with it, and you said too that sometimes you try to help steer districts to additional curriculums or other curriculums, et cetera. What are those curriculums and how does SIPS fall into that?
Yeah, we support a lot of different programs and we try to remain program agnostic, if you will, but certainly understanding that some have more strengths than weaknesses and some have more weaknesses than strengths. SIPS really is one that we've felt really committed to over the past, I'd say 6 years since we've been in the partnership with them, because it really does address the foundational skills in a very systematic, explicit manner and cumulative manner, which is really the focus for structured literacy. So although it's not a comprehensive curriculum and it cannot be taught by itself, and I really want to emphasize that it's only addressing one component of reading. If you think about Scarborough's rope, it's that really mainly that decoding aspect. There is some addressing of vocabulary at the morphological level, meaning that there's attention to developing students' knowledge of meanings of prefixes and suffixes and root words. But that's at the more advanced level of SIPs. So I'll just emphasize that it's one part of the curriculum, really addressing the decoding aspect and foundational skills aspect of reading, and vocabulary and comprehension really need to be supplemented, or you have to use other curriculum alongside of that, alongside of SIPs. But the beauty of SIPs really is that there's a placement assessment. And so students then enter in at different entry points along the continuum of learning. So there's 3 levels of SIPs. There's beginning, there's extension, and challenge. And so it's not grade level curriculum, but beginning is generally associated with kindergarten and maybe the beginning of first grade. And then the extension is really akin to first grade standards, of what kids are expected to be able to do, and a little bit into second grade. And then challenge is really second grade on up, really dealing with multisyllabic words and the units of meaning like morphology. So I think that's really the power of SIPs, is that's very efficient instruction. And so usually the lessons are about 30 minutes per day. And it's used as an intervention. So it can be a tier 1 supplement if the teachers are experiencing, like the one district I described, they're using Benchmark Advance, the California adopted curriculum, which has all the components of reading, but they recognize there are weaknesses in that. And so they're using SIPs in place of that as part of their tier 1. But many schools use SIPs as part of a tier 2 or even a tier 3 curriculum. And unfortunately, it doesn't have a research base of implementation. It has the research-based components, And we can say that when we see effective instruction with that curriculum, that kids really can excel, even kids who have dyslexia. Um, it doesn't have, it's not a program that has evidence that it works. And that's unfortunate because um, it is, we know that it works. It just needs studies to back it up. And that the company's working on that to try to get that to happen. It's a difficult proposition to have programs researched as a program that, you know, gets studied and then implemented and have multiple studies. It's challenging to do. So there's not a lot out there.
Definitely. How, so, you know, you've got a lot of parent advocates like me across the country, right? That, you know, I'm here because I have a dyslexic child who's struggling within the educational system.
Right.
Um, you know, and many of us sit within balanced literacy districts. From your perspective, how could somebody like me help, you know, other than like testifying at the school board, right? How can somebody like me potentially help steer a district to a more evidence-based approach and, you know, help them understand the need for support and professional services such as like what CORE offers? Because I'm finding that to be a challenge. You know, it's like you can say, hey, I want you to switch from balanced literacy to science of reading. And they're like, okay, hey, great. But I think that there's a disconnect between what that means. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It, and one of the things that's challenging about this is that a lot of people think about the science of reading as being phonics,
Yeah.
and balanced literacy doesn't teach phonics. And so there's this dichotomy that's created. Um, and it's really unfortunate because it's not representing the full array of complexity of that. Certainly, balanced literacy addresses phonics, but in a very different way. And I would say lacking research-based support for it, for how it's approached. And it's kind of more ad hoc or embedded rather than in a systematic, explicit, and cumulative way. So I really like the term structured literacy that the International Dyslexia Association really has coined.
Mhm.
And I'm a member of IDA and I'm on the editorial board for the Perspectives on Language and Literacy magazine.
Okay.
We're actually doing a series this summer of articles. The theme is implementation of structured literacy. So I'm the theme editor for that edition. And we've have some different people across the country, California, Mississippi, Michigan, who have kind of told their story about how they've kind of moved into the realm of structured literacy and changed their approach. So I don't really have, I think, a concrete answer. I think it takes a lot of time, and certainly I think having a group approach is more effective than having an individual approach. So what I would recommend is that if there are parents in a district who can kind of group together, and then present the science and have information about from what structured literacy is and how that compares to balanced literacy, and really have the district look at their data and say, here's our third grade reading scores, and here have the third grade reading scores have been over the past 10 years or 5 years or whatever. Has there been growth? And then the other challenging part is, depending on where you live, the zip
Mhm.
code, if you have a lot of students that are um, have a background, and trying to think of the appropriate words, so it's always tricky now, but um, you know lower socioeconomic status versus higher socioeconomic status, there tends to be differences in performance
Right.
between those two groups. And when you have situations where there are just a small population of lower socioeconomic students in the district, those kids can get kind of hidden away in terms of the larger improvement that's happening. So that's one of the things that I really appreciated about No Child Left Behind, is it really forced districts to disaggregate their data, no matter how small the populations were, to say, this is how our African American students are performing, this is how our Latino students are performing, this is how our special ed students are performing, et cetera. And then thinking about, how do we address the needs of those groups who may not be performing at the same levels as other groups. And so that's an important set of data to pull out, because it's really easy to say, well, we're doing fine, especially particular schools where they may have very little population, a small, very small population of students who aren't doing well. They're saying this is working for most of our kids, and some schools are okay with that, and they shouldn't be. But a lot of it has to do with just lack of education and not understanding really what science of reading is, as you alluded to, um, and needing that professional development.
Mhm.
What I would recommend too is for parents to go to our website, go to which is corelearn.com. You can go to the store link at the top, and then you can find the teaching reading source book. And we have a sampler of pages from that. And it's like maybe 15 or 20 pages. They can print that out, show the topics in that book, and say, this is an example of the kinds of things that teachers are learning about across this country in terms of structured literacy and the science of reading. Are you teaching your teachers that? And what are you doing to support that? That's a very concrete thing. And also bringing just some research, and there's lots of documents out there that talk about what the science of reading should have. I'm sure you know a lot about that, and you've been talking with people across the country for a long time about that. And there's plenty of resources out there that people can use. So a long-winded answer to your question, but it's kind of complicated because it's a lot of people are frustrated because they feel like they're beating their head up against the wall, and then districts aren't being responsive to what their needs are. One of the things that, my work has been over the past 20 years or plus years in education has been around helping teachers in general ed, like tier 1 instruction, improve that instruction, because it's so easy just to focus on intervention and tier 2 and tier 3 instruction. And that's not the right approach. We need to have our tier 1 instruction maximized efficiency aligned to the science of reading, so we can lessen the damage of instruction that's being provided to kids, so that we don't have so many kids to intervene for. And even kids who have mild dyslexia their dyslexia can be mitigated through high quality tier 1 instruction. Certainly their dyslexia, as you know, is on a continuum, and there are kids that are more severe. And if they're not responding to high quality tier 1 instruction and then an MTSS model tier 2 and tier 3 instruction, then they really need to be evaluated for dyslexia and then provided the supports and ongoing teaching that's necessary. But even that high quality instruction can lessen the severity of it. And that's where we need to get all of our districts across the country to. And it's not an easy task.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm in Texas, right?
Yeah.
So football is king.
I lived in Texas. I worked for Texas Reading First Initiative a long time ago, but yeah.
So you get it. And,
Yeah.
I remember meeting with school board members and, they kind of started bringing up football. And I was like, look, I don't want to take away from your football money. And I'm going to ask you to spend a lot of money in the beginning, but I'm going to save you a lot of money in the end. And, if you can just follow the curve, and, kids like mine aren't going to need to be, to have an IEP if you can catch them and teach them
Exactly.
correctly in the beginning.
Yep.
Versus slamming into the dyslexia wall, whether it's, there's lots of articles on the third grade wall. For mine, it was the first grade wall.
Yeah.
Where is that exactly, both from reading and from a writing perspective? Because I talk a lot about writing too, because my son is also dysgraphic, and
Yeah.
the writing instruction suffers as much as the reading instruction when things aren't taught explicitly, which you very well know.
Well, that's a whole nother
Yeah.
conversation about writing, because we've really struggled with writing instruction in this country for forever. I don't think we've ever gotten much better at writing, although I can say that I think we've gotten better at reading instruction over the past 25 years. I think there's more awareness around phonemic awareness and phonics. I still think there's a long way to go. Our university teacher preparation programs are lacking in many ways around the teaching the science of reading, but they're also hampered by the lack of time that they have training a professional body of knowledge. There's not a lot of time. It's not like doctors in medical school and lawyers going to law school. Teachers, if they're going through a traditional program at a university, it might be a year, or two at the most, that they are able to learn teaching methods and then practice their teaching and learning how to teach.
Mhm.
um, so yeah, I don't, to answer your question about writing, that to me, I don't even, it's a whole nother conversation, and my expertise is more around reading instruction over writing instruction. But
Right. Well, and
I
I'm
would,
not trying to paint you into a corner.
yeah, yeah. But going back to this is that when you're teaching reading, when you're teaching decoding skills, there's a companion encoding process. And when you're teaching a systematic explicit phonics lesson, there's a sequence of instruction that occurs that starts with phonemic awareness development, then teaches kids the letter sound correspondence, then practice blending words with that new letter sound correspondence, and then having an opportunity to spell words with that newly learned letter sound correspondence. So when you have, and then practicing reading and decodable text with that new letter sound correspondence and all the previous sound spelling correspondences that were learned before. There's a whole sequence to the instruction. So if teachers understand that sequence, they can then connect the phonics and the encoding, the writing part together to help kids learn to write and spell words correctly. So I would say that is, I think, a major component that I'm not sure as many people realize, that decoding encoding connection.
I definitely agree. And I apologize if you keep hearing my dog. She is not kenneled and is going crazy about absolutely everything because that's what she does.
No worries, I've experienced it too. I've got my dog sitting right here on the couch. He's pretty mellow, sleeping
So,
by my side every day when I work. I would say this too, that this conversation that we're having now, and I think it's been a really good one over the past few years, and I think it's been catapulted by the dyslexia lobby. Decoding dyslexia has been a wonderful catapult for the science of reading across the country, as well as Emily Hanford's podcast series on reading. And I think also we have social media now, and like this is a perfect forum for people to learn more about this and have a national conversation. When I was involved at the beginning, when I first learned about, now just to give it a little bit of my history, I started teaching in 1993. I went to San Diego State University and went through what I was told was a very, high quality teacher education program, but learned very little about how to teach reading. So I went into my elementary teaching experience knowing that I didn't know how to teach reading. So I didn't want to teach first grade because I knew I didn't have any clue. So I was teaching upper elementary. Then I've taught for a couple of years and then took a break from that for a couple of years and had the good fortune of working in a fellowship through the state legislature. This was in 1996, right when California was moving from a whole language philosophy, our framework, that Bill Honig, who founded CORE, had really helped to frame and build a network of whole language instruction. Then they wrote a reading program advisory in 1996 to be a complement to the whole language framework, to really say there's a whole scientific evidence base for learning to read that involves this thing called phonemic awareness. and systematic explicit phonics and reading text that's connected to the phonics instruction that they're learning. And this was in 1996. So we've had this conversation before. And then there was, the California Reading Initiative. Texas had its own reading initiative in the late 90s, and there was a huge amount of investment in training teachers in the Texas Reading Academies, the Governor's Reading Institutes in California. And then there was $1 billion appropriated to instructional materials in 1999 to align to the new standards. And that really helped us formulate a system in California, at least, where we had the knowledge around teaching reading, but then we had materials that were better aligned, not fully aligned, but better aligned to the science of teaching reading. So, and then we went through reading first, and that was in the first few years of the early 2000s, and then it kind of died away due to political reasons and funding and et cetera. And then Common Core came along, and everyone was like, yay, we can go back to teaching the way we used to. And then we saw the scores dropping, and then about 2015, 2016, we saw it, at Core anyway, a resurgence in people coming back to us saying, we need training in reading because our scores are dropping. And then decoding dyslexia, all the dyslexia legislation started kind of spreading like wildfire across the country. Then in 2017, Emily Hanford's podcast started. So it's nice to see that we're having this conversation again. And I'm hoping that it'll stick because of venues like this that we didn't have 20 years ago. I can't hear you.
Because my dogs were barking, I muted myself. And I texted my son to go kennel them. Sorry. And that's a lot of the reason why we sort of founded the Dyslexia Initiative was, there's so much dialogue and there's so many different things, but we wanted to create, help steer the conversation for parents because, parents like me, we're in the trenches, we're trying to work for change and advocate for change. And, it's kind of daunting. It's kind of a scary thing to do.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yeah. And that's why I think I really encourage groups of people to work together, because not only do you have your own child that you're concerned about, and you have to advocate for your child or a group of children, you also want to think about why is it that if you're looking at the data for the district, why is it that so many kids are underperforming in reading? And then you have to think about how do you advocate at a larger level to improve reading instruction across the board. Mm-hmm. And it is a daunting task. And I don't have, other than what I told you about just working in groups, getting research articles, and making connections to people, understanding where they are in education. And it's not like people are doing this necessarily, at least the teachers are not doing this on purpose. Like right. They're willingly withholding information from their kids. They're being told by their district, and being trained by their district in approaches, and are provided with or not provided with instructional materials that align to the science of reading. And that's where, even trying to advocate, get some teacher alignment to those parent groups to help with the conversation, I think can be helpful. I think that the big thing is just, you can't be adversarial in the process. You really need to, and it takes a long time, and people are impatient and frustrated. Your child is in kindergarten or first grade or second grade and struggling, and there's no time. There's a sense of urgency. Like, we got to do this now.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's a slower process. And I don't mean to laugh. I shouldn't have done that, but because I don't want to minimize the feelings of frustration that people have over this.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And to go back to something you said earlier, when you were talking about pulling the data out of the districts, I think in higher socioeconomic districts that becomes more challenging because parents are supplementing their children's education to such a degree. And so you can have higher success numbers, but that's because parents are investing such a large portion of their income to serve their children, right? And so I think those conversations become more challenging in those districts because they're like, but our numbers are great. Well,
Yeah.
but your numbers are not accurately great.
Yeah, that's fair. And I've never, it certainly makes sense, but I've never talked with anybody about that specific issue, what you just raised, because that does then get in the way of the data conversation. Um, and then you have to have data on, well, how many kids are being tutored outside
Yeah.
to get what they need. Um, and that's where then I am. You know,
Right.
that's where the groups come in to really start thinking about that. And how do you canvass all the schools across the district to get that data? And the districts don't have that data, right?
Right.
So it certainly is a challenging problem that you just really raised in my conscious level about how do you even figure that out?
Well, and when we interviewed Emily Hanford as well, she brought that statistic up
Mhm.
because in the higher socioeconomic districts, parents are also pulling their kids out for private schools as well. But you have that influx of support that you're not necessarily getting as you shift away from the higher socioeconomic. So the statistics are kind of skewed,
Yeah,
if you will.
yeah.
But then I always, in my head, I always go to something that Dr. Julie Washington said again in one of Emily's podcasts, where she was in one of the low socioeconomic schools, and she said, we can't differentiate the dyslexic children from the children that are just struggling from
Yep.
poor education.
Yes.
So they're all struggling equally across the board, but I can't point to that child across the room and go, that one's dyslexic.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So
And what does that even, at some point it starts getting all commingled with just language differences, in terms of, and I'm not just talking about English learners, I'm talking about kids who come to school with limited language that impacts their ability to learn to read as quickly as others. And so that language has to be developed. When we think about language development, we think of phonology, the sound system, morphology, which is the understanding of larger units of meaning like prefixes and suffixes and root words, and then semantics and syntax. And all of those combined together over time, as you learn to read and learn to write, that's all part of language development. It's not necessarily separate, it's all mixed together in terms of this idea of language development. And when you're teaching phonics and phonemic awareness and advanced phonics skills, you're developing the phonology and morphology aspect of language. And so a lot of people who are advocating in California for English learners, there's a very large English learner lobby in California, and they have been not accepting necessarily of efforts to improve reading instruction in California for a long time, because there's seen as an overemphasis on phonics, to the detriment of their language development. Because certainly English learners need additional language development beyond just high quality reading instruction that will also develop language. They need targeted approaches to learning English, and connecting to their existing language. So I, I just think that that this whole idea of language development is something that has to be part of, and Louisa Moats really emphasizes that in her talks, that we're developing language alongside of teaching reading. And that's that Scarborough's rope, going back to the language comprehension side. So that's an important feature to remember. And again, going back to what I said earlier, is that when we focus the conversation around the one strand or one component, or the decoding strand, then the larger conversation gets lost. And so I think it's important also when communicating that it's not just only around phonics and phonemic awareness, but structured literacy and making sure that all the components of reading art and language are addressed. That could be
And
advocacy work.
I remember when the review of the Teachers College Reading and Writing Workshop came out. Is that a year ago now? That was
Yeah,
January of
a little
last
bit
year,
over
right?
a year. Yeah. Because I remember I was traveling. Yeah, it was around January 2020. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a little
that's
over
what
a
I
year.
thought.
Yeah.
Because Emily released one of her, an interview around that specifically, and I can't remember who it was. I want to say it was Timothy Odegaard, but
Mhm.
I think that I'm wrong in that association. But that, whoever it was said, can, we've got to get away from the concept that science of reading is just phonics, because
Yeah.
it's absolutely not true. And, it's a marketing mechanism that has managed to sell itself quite well, but it's absolutely not true. Can we just all agree on that and move on?
Yeah. Well, and here's a prime example of that, how it's unfolded in California. I'll use it as an example. There is legislation to have a dyslexia screener. And this is pretty revolutionary for California because we've never had anything pass. Whereas in Texas, back in 1998, they had a early reading screening initiative for K3, or K2, all kids K2 are required to be screened for early reading difficulties. And in California, we've never had that and really wanted to have something like that. So this is the first time that we've entered into that conversation. But the English learner lobby really are advocating that if it's going to be detrimental to English learners, because then kids will be over identified with dyslexia and then their curriculum is going to be narrowed because they're just going to get focused on teaching phonics. And so it's really a red herring, I think, in many ways. I think certainly if you're not careful and districts aren't providing good leadership, teachers can overspend an inordinate amount of time on phonics. But I had some of this problem when I was working in LA Unified with the open court reading program being implemented. This is back in 2000 through like 2003 that I was there. And people were spending larger blocks of time than the program required on the green section of open court, which was the foundational phonics phonemic awareness part. And I think in part it comes from the lack of understanding about how to teach it. And they get bogged down in the instruction, not understanding the program. And there was lots of training that went and coaching that went along with it, but it takes a long time to learn that. And so then people see what's happening in practice and then in the implementation of something, and they're saying they're spending too much time on phonics. See, this is not good. The kids aren't learning to comprehend and they're just going to be word callers. All of these conversations I think have some level of merit, but it's also in how things are implemented and how administrators need to have knowledge also of the curriculum, of the science of reading, so that they can then better lead their teachers to implement programs effectively. That's a big challenge, is good implementation of the curriculum. And I'll go back to the example that I used in the district near Santa Cruz that we're supporting and have been for a long time. It takes a long effort, to be
Mhm.
able to help teachers understand not only the whys behind the curriculum, but also how do we actually teach it? How do we implement it? And it's not an easy thing just to pick up the book and start teaching away. It's not.
Yeah, very true. I have to, because I'm not a scientist and, I'm not an educator. I'm just, I, I've spent my career in the business world, right?
Yeah.
So, but because of my age, I was taught through the science of reading based on, the years that I went to school before balanced literacy really started its resurgence in Texas.
Yeah. So you went to school in Texas. Okay.
Yeah, I'm born and raised, and still living here. But, I hear people talk about the whole phonics thing and, if you can't sound out the word, I mean, you're just being able to sound out the word, you're not necessarily retaining vocabulary. But I remember, because I'm the youngest child in my family, right?
Too.
a lot younger than my siblings as well. And so they were doing these great big things, and I was dying to grow up just to be like them, right? And my sister was a very avid reader. She always had a book in her hand. I always, I remember reading Grapes of Wrath. Out of all the books she read, for some reason, that's the one that sticks out in my head.
Okay.
But I remember those first books and being initially taught how to read in kindergarten and thinking, if I sound out this word, I'm going to recognize this word, and then I'm going to know what that word means. And if I don't, I can use the dictionary over here to look up the word in order to find out what that means, and then I can stick that in my vocabulary.
Exactly.
And I feel like when people are like, it's only phonics, I'm like, well, what's wrong with phonics? You're still giving keys as access to language.
It's a,
It's the doorway.
yeah, it's a critical component, and I certainly don't want to give any indication that I'm minimizing it. It's
Oh,
hugely,
not at all.
but vocabulary is also hugely important. And so when you're thinking about instruction in kindergarten and first grade, it really has to be kind of two parallel strands, because kids' ability to read the words on the page is it, their language ability is so much higher than what they can actually read.
Right.
So it takes a few years for that to catch up to that. And so what you want to do is, as you're teaching phonemic awareness and phonics and the letters and how to write the letters and spell and everything, you also have this parallel strand where you're reading aloud to kids quality, rich literature and um, text, the informational text, to help kids build their knowledge, and, teaching social studies and science topics within reading instruction is something that a lot of publishers, I think, do pretty well in their curricula. Some do better than others, but I think that's pretty much, when you look at the writing, what kids are reading in their anthologies, there is a nice mix of content. Um, so that's an important feature of early instruction, that kids should not just be relegated to reading decodable text or leveled text, that they should be hearing on a daily basis high quality literature that's going to continue to build their vocabulary. And for kids who come with limited vocabularies, then you need to do even more with that and do specific teaching of words and word learning strategies. There's a whole science to teaching vocabulary,
Mhm.
aside from teaching phonics. So it's a super complex task. Um, Louisa Motz's article, teaching reading as rocket science, is certainly true.
Yeah.
However, um, when teachers have training and support and high quality materials, the training that helps them understand how kids learn to read and how to teach phonics and phonemic awareness and vocabulary, and they have the materials that are aligned with that knowledge base that they're learning, they get it, they can do it. But if they're not provided with the knowledge or the materials, then they're struggling, and it's not fair. And we know too much about what to do,
Mhm.
to continue this and to do things like balanced literacy. You go back to that units of study. It's not just that they lack phonics. I'm sure you read the report. There's a whole, it's lacking in systematic vocabulary development and building knowledge. I mean, it's all of the components of Scarborough's rope that
Right.
the units of study doesn't adequately address. Maybe some parts they do better than others, but overall it doesn't. And there is a huge alignment in this country to those units of study. And they're trying to scramble to kind of improve those and everything. And it's like, there's stuff out there now that people can use,
Mhm.
they should be using. And a lot of districts are, but there's still a long way to go.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I want to switch gears because we've been talking for a while, and I don't want to keep you forever because I'm sure you you have plans for your day. But one of the things you and I talked about when we were exchanging emails was all of the content that you have on your website and the different videos, et cetera. And, I find that a lot within the parent community, they're seeking the information that they can, just take in and absorb, whether it's videos, it's books, it's
Yeah.
so.
Absolutely. But you know, if am I able to share my screen,
Um,
or is it something that's not, because it's Facebook, it's not?
I think, did I just allow it?
I don't know. Let me try it. Let me go here.
If not, I can make you the host and you can share.
Okay, give me a second here. I'm trying to get myself set up here. I'm gonna see if I can share my screen. I think I can. Can
Yeah,
you
I figured it out. I
see?
had to make Pete write the host last week because I couldn't figure out.
It went up to a whiteboard though, so I'm not sure why the white. Okay, can you see my screen?
No.
Oh,
You know what I can do though? I can make you the host.
okay, making
Just
the
when we're done, you'll be the one to end the Zoom.
okay. Let's see if that
But
works.
let me,
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I started going on my tangents of different things, and we do have a wealth of resources that parents and teachers can use. Am I the host now?
you are.
Okay, so give me a second here to get myself set up again. So I'm not. Oh, okay, I see. I think I could have done it. I was on the wrong thing when I shared. So I shared the whiteboards. That's why the whiteboard. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So this is our website. And if you along the screen band, here's information about our online reading course, and it gives kind of how much it costs and everything. People can find out more about it, and we have different um, courses, like I said, the mixed courses. So June 3rd and September 16th are the ones that anyone can register for, and parents, if they wanted to, could as well. We haven't had very many parents do that, but it's certainly, I think the course and the book that we have are user friendly in that regard.
Okay.
But if you go to the resources tab, it's kind of near the right side, click on that, and you scroll down just a little bit, you see all these buttons.
Mhm.
There, as I wrote a white paper on dyslexia, we have other white papers that we've written. There are, and this is really the one key thing I want to show everybody, is the webinars. We've got some wonderful webinars. They're 1-hour webinars. We've got big names that have done. Julie Washington has done a webinar for us. Louisa Moats has done a couple different webinars for us. David Kilpatrick has done some. These are great names in reading. And so what I would recommend is people just clicking on this webinars tab, just scrolling down and seeing all the different options they have, and they can go to town watching 1-hour webinars. And you can see we've got 5 or more pages of these links to the different webinars. But going back to the resources tab, we've got videos of instruction that people can use. We've got our newsletters and blogs. Our academic quarterly is written 3 times a year, and I've done several specific editions on dyslexia. One that I think is really important was kind of helping differentiate between screening for dyslexia or early reading difficulties and evaluating for dyslexia. I think that's a challenge for many people, that the idea of screening for dyslexia doesn't mean that the kid has dyslexia, but it means that they are exhibiting risk factors that may eventually, if something's not done, that it may lead to dyslexia. And so then you use that information from screening then to provide high quality tier 1, tier 2 or intervention as needed. And then if they're not responding to that intervention and instruction, and you've done different things to try to make sure that instruction's high quality, targeted, aligned to the science of reading, and they're still not responding, then you can start thinking, okay, maybe there's a challenge here. And what's challenging about that, I know I'm going off the topic here a little bit, but I want to say this, that many districts who don't have the understanding of what effective intervention looks like for kids who struggle with reading, they're giving them more balanced literacy intervention.
Right.
Leveled literacy intervention is one that's very popular. And so it's not meeting the needs of the kids. And so when we were writing the dyslexia guidelines for one state, some of the parents and dyslexia advocates were saying, we want our kids to be identified with dyslexia right out of the gate, because then we want them to get the proper services rather than getting going through this MTSS model where then they're going to get interventions that are not effective. And so it's a super complex issue that it still needs a lot of work to be solved. But I digress.
But no, I think you bring up a great point, because a lot of our community talks about RTI, and
Mhm.
we talk a lot about RTI, and
Mhm.
but at its core, RTI is a great theory. It's not usually implemented well because, like you said, the child goes into RTI, and we like to call it death by RTI, but they go into RTI and they're just getting more balanced literacy.
Yeah. And that's really where we need to. I learned balanced literacy in 1993 when I started my first teaching stint. I
Mhm.
was learning about the three cueing systems. And at that time, I had gotten whole language from San Diego State, where it's just read to your kids and here's some phonics games and go to town teaching. When I got that training, I was like, well, at least this is more organized. It's a more organized form of whole language, but I still don't
Mhm.
feel like I can know how to teach reading. What is this three cueing system? And they've even simplified it even more with the three cueing system. They're talking about MSV, meaning syntax and visual. And before it was semantics, syntax, and graphophonemic or graphophonic cue. And when you think about the term graphophonic or graphophonemic, it's graph, which is the spelling of the word,
Mhm.
how the letters are organized. And then the phone is the sound. So sounds and spellings together, that's more accurate than just visual. Now they're calling it visual, meaning relegating reading to just a visual thing. And reading is not a visual act. It's an auditory, it's a language-based act.
I
So
see.
I'm just, again, I digress, but um, newsletters, videos, the webinars, I would really recommend people coming to the website and checking out our webinars. They're amazing and fantastic. We just had a recent one on by Selenide Gonzalez, who worked with Linnea Airy, who is a renowned researcher in the whole issue around phonics and phonemic awareness and decoding. She did this wonderful webinar on connected phonation versus segmented phonation in terms of how to sound out words. And there's research to show that when you continue the sounds, when you're teaching kids to sound out words versus segmenting them, the sounds are held in their memory better and they can attack the word more easily.
Hmm.
So that's just a very specific detail. So I would highly recommend this, just watching this one, but certainly look at using phonics assessment data to inform instruction, the
Mhm.
ABCs of using assessment data to target phonics instruction. So we have a lot of stuff around phonics, but we also have other things around vocabulary development and also math ones as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I'll stop sharing.
That's an amazing, I mean, I'm blown away. That's an amazing resource. And we've actually had a principal comment saying that pricing was actually quite fair, that they've seen a lot for far more. So,
Oh, good. Well, we try to stay competitive. So yeah, I know district budgets are tight a lot of times. I think this coming year, districts will have some more flexibility with money because of COVID and attempts to try to help with unfinished teaching and learning. So we're hoping for. Last year was a tough year or this past year was a tough year for us financially because a lot of districts had to concentrate on other things. So our services were not as needed.
yeah,
They're needed
a
more
lot
than.
of computers were bought for kids that needed access to computers for our virtual
Yeah,
educational world.
yeah.
Um, well, this has been an amazing session and you've shared so much information. I don't want to take up I promised you I'd only take up an hour and we've been going longer than that.
That's
So
okay. I'm passionate about this work, and so I'm happy to talk, and I'm happy to come back again at some point if you feel like you want to hear more.
definitely, would definitely bring you back. So, but I want to let you go for the day and let everybody, we've got a ton of comments. Tried to take a look at all of them. I invite you as well if that's something that you want to do.
Yeah,
But
and I'll just say some final words to everybody who's listening. That
please, that's
keep
what I was about to ask.
Yeah, just Keep up the good fight. Make yourself as knowledgeable as possible around reading instruction, the science of reading and what that actually means, and continue to advocate. As frustrating as it is, I think the one suggestion that I'll repeat was that don't do this alone. There are people out there to support you. And Ashley, I know you can provide resources for people, but there's tons of resources out there that help people understand the science of reading, and just keep at it. That's all I can say. Don't give up. It's a long haul, and but I think we're at a good place now. I think we're getting there. I think we're learning. People are learning more, and really, ultimately, we have to believe. And you, as parents and teachers and administrators, all have to believe that everyone wants to do the right thing. And when we know better, we do better. And that's really what it is. It's about education.
Definitely. And we've said quite often it's through unification of our efforts that things are really going to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
As long as we work in silos, we're only going to get so far. But our voices united together, I think, are really going to create great things for our children in the future.
Absolutely. A great way to say it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for your time
Well, thank
today.
you so much for having me. It was an honor.
Well, thank you so much. So we're going to sign off, everybody. I hope you have a really great weekend. And a reminder to you, Dr. Webster, you're going to end the Zoom.
Sounds good. All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Take care. And meeting for all. Here we go.